Hey there, Slashaholics. This is your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian with an exciting offer for you. You can go to www.80stees.com right now and find shirts from your favorite TV shows, movies, cartoons, horror movies, video games, and more. And there's so much more than just shirts. So head on over to 80stees.com where we've partnered up to bring you an amazing offer. 30% off your purchase at checkout with promo code SlashTracks30. Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror. Fatal Games by Bruce Richards. Chapter 29. The side door of Chip's house slammed loudly, startling Chip. Then he watched as Al stormed out of the house, jumped into his van, and tore out of the driveway, leaving twin patches of smoking rubber. Seconds later, he heard the van screeching around a corner somewhere down Elm Street. Chip gave Mr. Murphy an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, sir, but I think I should be going." "Sure thing, kid," Mr. Murphy said, in an understanding voice. "I'll be seeing you around. I hope everything works out for you and your family in your new home. At least I hope it works out better than it did for the previous owners." Mr. Murphy chuckled woefully. "Thank you, sir." "And stop calling me sir." "Yes, sir," Chip said distractedly as he hurried toward the side door. He saw his mother through the back kitchen window, a dark outline sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, her chest heaving. Chip rushed into the kitchen and found his mother convulsing in sobs. He pulled a chair up next to her and wrapped his arms around her. "It's all right, Mom. Don't worry about Al. I think this old house is creeping him out a little bit." "And me, too," Chip said to himself. "You don't think it's a dump, do you?" his mother asked him, stifling a sob. "Not at all," Chip said, in as sincere a voice as he could muster. Haunted, maybe, he thought, but they had lived in worse dumps than this. Mrs. Parker cried a bit more before managing to compose herself. Chip gave her a gentle squeeze on the shoulder and busied himself around the kitchen, cleaning up jagged shards of glass. Al had apparently smashed the empty juice jug on the floor. "I think Al's bummed out about moving. Maybe he misses his friends," Chip said. "You mean those hoodlums?" Mrs. Parker asked with a sniffle, not really expecting an answer. Yeah, those friends, Chip thought, the Red Dragon Brotherhood. Except that maybe they had a chapter here, a chapter that was led by Johnny Murphy, till he went bonkers and was shipped off to the crazy house. "I can't believe Al would imagine that anybody but Mike Parker was your father." Mrs. Parker shook her head forlornly. "I know he often says things just to be mean, but that is the most unusual thing I've ever heard. Who could be putting those thoughts in his head? Do you know, Chip?" Chip only shrugged. "Like you said, sometimes Al just says things to be mean." "I'd still like to know who is filling his head with such awful thoughts. I'd give him a piece of my mind," his mother said sternly. She rose from the kitchen chair, wiping her tear-streaked face with the sleeve of her dress. "Al really is getting out of hand. I just hope he can make it through the school year without getting into any more trouble. Then he's on his own," Mrs. Parker said with a resigned air. "I did the best I could raising him." Chip watched his mother cross to the stove. She lifted the lid on the curry and stirred it with the big wooden spoon. A spicy aroma filled the kitchen. "There's plenty to eat here if you're hungry, Chip." "Okay, Mom," Chip said. His mother's vegetarian dishes weren't his favorite. Chip guessed that Al was already at line at McDonald's for his dinner. Well, I think I'll be getting back to the shop, Mrs. Parker said. There's still so much to do. How are things over there? Do you need some help? They're coming along fine, dear. Thanks for offering, but I can take care of it myself. Don't worry. Okay, Mom. She pulled the odd-looking cape thing she wore as a coat off a wooden hook in the foyer and headed for the front door, patting her dress pocket lightly to make sure her car keys and wallet were in place. Chip intercepted her at the door and gave her a hug. Don't you worry either, Mom, Chip said. Thanks, hon, I needed that, she said. She closed the door behind her and waved. Chip returned to the kitchen to finish cleaning up. He plunged his hands into the dishwater, and then he heard his mother scream. Chip dashed through the living room and headed for the front door, choking back his panic. He realized for the first time that he had believed his brother was capable of murder. He pushed open the front door with a trembling hand. A pale moon floated low in a purple sky, and beneath the moon, Chip saw his mother standing with her hands on her chest. Standing in front of her was a dark, hooded figure. Chip thought his heart might explode, and then he heard his mother laugh, an embarrassed laugh. You gave me such a fright, she said to the hooded figure. I'm sorry, I was just looking for Chip, said a familiar voice. Chip hurried down the front steps as a wave of relief swept over him. I'm right here. His mother turned and stepped to the side, and Chip saw Alicia looking back at him with an awkward smile. She was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt over a pair of polka dot leggings. Chip pulled up short. He didn't know exactly how to greet her. She had left under such strange circumstances before. Hi, Chip, she said with a little wave. Hi. Mrs. Parker fixed Chip with a bemused expression. Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend? Oh, Chip said, snapping out of it. Mom, this is Alicia. Alicia, my mom. Glad to meet you, Alicia, Mrs. Parker said with a wide smile. Do you go to Springwood High with Chip? Not exactly, Alicia said. I'm a neighbor. Alicia came over Saturday to help me clean the house, Chip said, thinking it was only a small lie. She had come over to help clean, but they had just never gotten around to it. Oh, how nice, Mrs. Parker said in a cheery voice. It's wonderful to have such friendly neighbors. She dug into her pocket for her car keys. Hi-ho, hi-ho, it's off to work I go, she sang, jingling in her keys. It was nice meeting you, Alicia. She turned to leave. Bye, Mrs. Parker, it was nice meeting you, Alicia called after her. Mrs. Parker walked to her station wagon parked out front beneath the pale shining light of the street lamp. Chip watched his mother drive away. I like her, Alicia said, fixing him with those eyes that never ceased to amaze him. Day-glow eyes that gleamed brightly in the moonlight. Incredible, unusual eyes. You want to talk? Chip asked. Okay, Alicia said softly. Chip took her hand and they walked to his house. Chip held the door open for her, but Alicia hesitated. She glanced past Chip. Is your brother home? She asked. No, he went out. I don't think he'll be back real soon. Alicia turned to look over her shoulder and shuddered. What's the matter? Chip asked. I had the weirdest feeling like someone's watching me. It's been going on for days. I can feel eyes boring into my back, but when I turn to look, there's no one there. I guess I'm just being paranoid. She tried to shrug off her uneasiness, but Chip could see the fear in her eyes. After all, Alicia continued, who could be following me? Why would someone want to spy on me? She looked past Chip, still searching for the person she thought might be shadowing her. Down the street, Chip saw a light blue Civic parked in the shadows. Then the car lights flashed on, and the Civic was rolling down the street toward them. Come on, let's go into the house, Chip said, taking her by the arm and heading her inside. Alicia sat at the kitchen table as Chip finished cleaning up the mess Al had made. I guess I should apologize, Alicia said with an awkward smile, shifting uncomfortably on the kitchen chair and scratching at a spot on the Formica tabletop. You had me worried, Chip admitted. Why'd you run out like that? I guess it was something your brother said, about you being the son of you-know-who. Chip laughed. You can't be serious. You believe that? Alicia shrugged and gave Chip an embarrassed smile. If you've been through what I've been through... Her voice trailed off and Chip tried to picture Alicia strapped into the chair. Scott Martin told me a little bit about what happened down there, but I don't believe all the things he said about you." At the mention of Scott's name, Alicia visibly stiffened. "About me?" Alicia asked. She seemed on the verge of tears. "I didn't take any of it seriously," Chip reassured her. Alicia chewed on her lower lip for a moment. Her eyes were filled with sadness. "I loved him. Once. Maybe I still do. I still wear his letter jacket. I was wearing it the night of our accident. Now it's all I have left of him." She looked nervously at Chip. "Did he tell you what happened in the basement?" Chip nodded. "I heard his side of the story. What's your side?" Alicia was hesitant. "My side's still a bad dream." Suddenly, Alicia turned pale. Chip hurried to her side. He put his hand on her neck. Her skin was hot to the touch. She unzipped her sweatshirt. She was perspiring heavily. "Every time I think of what happened that night, I start to feel really sick." Chip got Alicia a glass of cold water. She thanked him and took a big gulp. "After what happened," she began, "we thought things were going to be all right again. Scott saw several plastic surgeons, and they all believed his scars would heal in time. Then the strangest thing began to happen. His scars got worse. His whole face did, and his hand wouldn't heal. It turned into a claw. It was like there was a cancer inside of him, a cancer of fear, and it was twisting his face, his hand, his mind, making him even more deformed than ever. After a while, he wouldn't see me anymore," Alicia continued. "He wouldn't see anyone anymore because his face was so ugly. He wouldn't answer the phone when I called, and he wouldn't come to the door when I went to his house. I wrote him a letter after letter, but he never answered them. And yet, I had this feeling that he still cared about me, that he was watching me." Alicia's cheek began to tremble. "I can't get over that feeling that I'm being watched. By him. By everyone. That's why I don't go out very much anymore, and why I didn't go back to school. This feeling I have of always being watched." "Well, I don't want to freak you out or anything," Chip said, "but he is following you." "What?" Alicia asked, stunned. Chip nodded. "And he's been keeping an eye on me and this house, too." Alicia was mortified. "Why would he want to come back to this place of all places?" Chip shrugged. "I don't know why, but he was here in the basement, burning your letters in the furnace." Alicia's mouth fell open. "I don't believe this." Chip told her about Scott breaking into the basement. Alicia listened in amazement. "Scott's gone. He's totally gone," she said in dismay. "He thinks there's an evil spirit floating around, maybe in this house." Chip's eyes fixed on Alicia in a steady gaze. "And maybe in you." "Me?" Alicia gasped, stunned. Her face turned completely white. "I know there's an evil spirit here." Her features grew tight with fear. "I've met the evil spirit here, in my dreams, my nightmares, but it's not me." She gave Chip an imploring look. "Is it?" Chapter 30. Scott knew it was now or never. He was parked just close enough to keep an eye on the house. The evil house. Al had left already, roaring down the street in his white van with an angry scowl on his face. Not much later, the woman had left, probably their mother. And now Chip and Alicia were left. Chip with his Alicia. His lost Alicia. His evil Alicia. The same evil that had ravaged his face and destroyed his life. "Look at yourself!" a voice commanded Scott, a voice that came from deep within. Scott turned the rearview mirror with a trembling hand and gazed at his reflection. He always trembled when he looked at himself, the gash so deep across his face, and growing deeper. His bad eye twittering more than ever. It was becoming like a cartoon eye popped out of the socket, attached to a spring. His lip was drooping more and more every day, making his lisp even worse, and his teeth appeared to be growing sharper and more jagged with each passing moment. Even if the plastic surgeons could put his face back together someday, what about his mind? Who would put the shattered pieces of his mind back together? When would it end? It would end when the evil was gone, when it was incinerated, ashes to ashes. Now was the time to act. It was too bad that Chip had to die too, but what else could he do? He had to kill the evil house and the evil girl, before the evil spread. Scott got out of the car and went around back to the trunk. He removed a 10-gallon gas container, then he headed for Chip's yard, staying to the shadows, staying out of sight as much as he could. If they caught him later, he didn't care, as long as he had burned the house down first. Fight fire with fire. Scott dashed past the driveway. The kitchen light was on. They were probably in there. He went around to the other side of the house. The basement window he had broken the other night hadn't been repaired yet. He'd pour some gas into the basement. He'd start there, where the evil was the strongest. Then he'd spread the rest of the gas around. He'd have to figure out a way to keep them in the house as it burned. At least keep Alicia in there. If it meant he had to go inside the flames to keep her there, he was prepared to do it. As Scott unscrewed the gas container, he heard footsteps crunching his way, crunching through dead leaves, coming fast. Scott looked up, startled. A hooded figure stood before him, a gleaming knife in his hand, a knife with a red dragon handle. "You!" Scott gasped, dropping the gas container. "How did you—" The hooded figure thrust the knife blade into Scott's chest. When he pulled it out, crimson spurted everywhere. Scott, his eyes wide with horror, fell to his knees, clasping his hands over his heart. Then he fell face down into a tangle of dead weeds. Moments later, Scott was as dead as the weeds. The hooded figure picked up the gas container and poured gasoline over Scott's corpse. He cackled once, a sadistic chuckle, then set it on fire. It blazed up like a Viking funeral pyre. The murderer watched the fire lick and dance as he did his own little jig to the dead. Malicious laughter filled the frosty night air. Tongues of flames grew higher and higher into the sky as Scott's body turned a hideous black. Then the hooded figure disappeared back into the night. Chapter 31. Chip had spent the last 10 minutes reassuring Alicia that she was not possessed by an evil spirit. He decided to change the subject. "Al and I found a passageway in our basement the other night," he said. "You want to see it?" "In the basement?" "Yeah. No thanks. I think it leads outside somewhere. You've lived here for a while. What do you think it could be?" Chip asked. Alicia gave it some thought. "A lot of the houses around here were part of the Underground Railroad. You know, where they used to hide runaway slaves? I guess it could be something like that." Chip nodded. "So you think someone could get in and out of my house that way?" "I guess so," Alicia said. "But why would anyone want to? It's horrible down there." Chip shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe some neighborhood kids on a dare or something. I thought I'd follow it to find out where it goes," Chip said, hoping Alicia would take the hint and accompany him. It was scary and probably filled with rats, but that might work as an excuse for her to stay close to him, to hold his hand, jump into his arms. "It probably comes out somewhere behind your backyard," she said, "in the woods, someplace hidden." "What's past the woods?" "The Elm Street Cemetery," Alicia said. In the distance they heard sirens. The blaring noise was coming closer. Bang, bang! Someone was knocking loudly on the front door. Chip knocked his chair over backward as he scrambled to the door to see what was going on. He heard Alicia's chair scrape back as she followed him. "What is it?" Chip yelled as he swung the door open. Nick Murphy was standing in front of him, his eyes bugging out, his chest heaving frantically. "You better come out here, son," he shouted. Then he noticed Alicia and said in a lower voice, "Don't let her see this." "Alicia, wait here," Chip shouted over his shoulder as he hurried out after Mr. Murphy. "I saw the fire from my bedroom window," Mr. Murphy said. "I already called 911. Elm Street came alive with noise and flashing colors as first one fire engine, then another rounded the corner and came up the street. A white EMS truck followed. The fire trucks and 2 Springwood police cruisers brought up the rear. They all converged on Chip's house. Chip rounded the corner of his house. At first it looked like someone had built a bonfire in the backyard. Then the smell of smoke, gasoline, and burning flesh filled his nostrils. The vile smoke stung Chip's eyes as he saw the horror. Scott Martin was shriveling up as the fire ate him away bit by bit. Most of the boy had already been consumed by the flames, roasted like a cannibal's barbecue. But even though the body was charred beyond recognition, his face remained, and what was left of Scott Martin made him easy to identify. He had a face you didn't easily forget. Chip spun around and thought he might throw up. He saw Alicia, frozen in horror, staring at the burning mess that used to be the boy she loved. Her eyes were wide open, taking in every bit of the grisly scene. Tears streamed down her face, and her lips extended out in a silent sob. Chip took a deep breath and fought back the knot tightening his stomach. He went to Alicia and turned her away from the gruesome sight. He pulled her into his arms and gently pushed her head against his shoulder. Her wild hair reflected the dancing, glowing flames. "Don't look," Chip said softly into Alicia's ear. "Don't look." The comforting gesture broke Alicia's stony silence. She convulsed into sobs. The firemen rushed into the yard, unraveling hose. Water was turned on and aimed at Scott's black and smoking body. Chip looked away from the nauseating sight, and his eyes passed over what appeared to be a bright red gas container a few feet away from Scott's outstretched fingers. The fingers that poked out of the cast, that oddly hadn't burned. The white plaster gleamed brightly, eerily in the moonlit yard. Had Scott killed himself? Chip wondered. Burned himself to death? A blue-uniformed police officer approached. "You live here?" he asked Chip, pulling a notepad from his back pocket. Yes, sir," Chip told the cop, still holding Alicia, staring at Scott again, staring out of morbid curiosity. "Did you know this guy?" the cop asked, gesturing to the smoking remains. Chip tried to answer, but the lump in his throat choked off his words. A sharp, bitter smell assailed his nostrils, the bitter smell of death. No wonder Alicia seemed so weirded out. He was beginning to feel the same way. It seemed to come with the territory on Elm Street. Chip watched the fireman rewind the hose. "You don't look so good," the cop said to Chip. "I'm okay," Chip croaked, trying to swallow the lump in his throat so he could speak normally again. "Did you know that guy?" the cop asked again, pencil tip poised on the notepad paper. "Sorry I have to bother you with questions, but I have to make out my report." "No, it's okay," Chip said, finally regaining his voice. It was Scott Martin." "Scott Martin?" the cop said, pushing his policeman's cap back on his head, looking more closely at the charred corpse. "The Springwood quarterback?" Chip nodded his assent. "I'll be damned," the cop said, scribbling something down. "Can you tell what happened?" Chip asked. The firemen were restoring their gear into the fire engines. Some of the neighbors had come out on their porches to watch. Some just watched from behind drawn shades, as if they were afraid to go out, afraid of what they might see. "It's hard to say for sure right now," the cop said, ruefully shaking his head, looking at Scott's corpse again. "But it looks like Martin was trying to burn down your house." Chip's eyes wandered back to the grisly carcass. "But he burned up himself instead," Chip heard the cop say in a voice that seemed 1,000 miles away. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 29, 30, and 31 of Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Fatal Games by Bruce Richards. I still feel really bad about putting out the second book before the first book. I had done David Bergantino's books first, which was 4, 5, and 6, or 3, 4, 5, and 6, excuse me. And I didn't know that 1 and 2 that were by Bruce Richards were like direct continuations of each other. So I guess whenever I do book 1 pretty soon, we can just look at it as a prequel to this one instead of this being a sequel to it. We'll get all the holes filled in that we're not getting from the first story in this book. I'm sorry for any spoilers for anybody that hasn't read book number 1 yet, but I will be narrating it. It will be available on the channel. Also want to apologize for it being so long between narrations. For this narration, I've been very busy lately with stuff in my personal life, as well as expanding the Slash Tracks brand to a weekly podcast. It's a lot of fun. It's called Slash Tracks Action News. Check it out. It's kind of a comedy / funny news story show. We also talk about like pro wrestling, horror movie news, fun facts from around the world, and also headlines, crazy, funny headlines, and some sports in there. It's a lot of fun. I think you'll enjoy it. As far as where this story's going, I did not see Scott getting killed. I thought he would actually get the house, the fire started, maybe it would get put out or something. So yeah, I'm not totally sure who the killer is here. I'm guessing Al, but he sure does seem like more of a red herring to me. So it's going to be fun to find out who the actual killer is. I'm looking forward to that. I think we have 1, maybe 2 more uploads of this book, and then it's going to be finished. Then I'm going to get back to trying to narrate Final Destination, Destination Zero, as well as Freddy vs. Ash. That's not Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. Freddy vs. Ash is a fan novel. So I'm going to be reading that here on the channel. I spoke to the author. They're a great person, and she's excited about me narrating it for all you Slashaholics. So I'll be back very soon with more of Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Fatal Games. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening. Be sure to go to 80stees.com and use the promo code SlashTracks30 at checkout to get 30% off your purchase at 80stees.com. Be excellent to each other, and I'll see you soon. Hey there, Slashaholics. This is your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian with an exciting offer for you. You can go to www.80stees.com right now and find shirts from your favorite TV shows, movies, cartoons, horror movies, video games, and more. And there's so much more than just shirts. So head on over to 80stees.com, where we've partnered up to bring you an amazing offer. 30% off your purchase at checkout with promo code SlashTracks30.